Well, good morning, Gurdeep. Really, really good to welcome you to this, I think, the fourth of these uh, conversations for stationers, liverymen and so on. It's great to see you.
Good morning. Good morning, Stephen.
And you are presumably at present in London at work or whatever, yeah?
That's right. At home here in East London.
Yes. And where in East London is that exactly?
It's in East Ham, and it's an interestingly named place that apparently refers back to the flatlands. So Ham has roots in Hame and also in Hamlet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. And but you're originally from the West Midlands, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was born in Birmingham. Moved to Handsworth and then lived in West Bromwich. So I've dotted around the Black Country.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And but then, so were you at school in the West Midlands?
That's right. I went to Queen Mary's Grammar School. We moved down to London when I was 13, and we've been here ever since.
Yeah. Right. So you're sort of a well ensconced Londoner really now.
I'd like to think so, although there are elements of my personality and makeup that are still firmly West Midlands.
And in between, you were in Oxford for your degrees. That's right.
Correct. Yeah, I went to St Hugh's College and studied English there.
And that presumably has been a great foundation for all you've done in the ensuing years.
Yes, absolutely. I was very, very lucky to have a brilliant tutor, Pete MacDonald, who taught us to interrogate as much as we possibly could and always ask what was at stake in every single piece of discourse or conversation, which is, it can lead to some frightening conclusions, but is definitely a useful skill.
And he was based at St Hugh's or not?
That's right. Yeah, he was a Don at St Hugh's.
Yeah, right. Oh well, I'm feeling very onside at the moment because I'm a Londoner by birth and I love Oxford and did my second degree at Oxford. So you must be okay.
That's good to hear.
So when you finished at Oxford, you went on to directly into publishing.
I dotted around for a little while. I thought about becoming a teacher, and an old teacher of mine helped me to get a admin post at a secondary school, and 6 months of that was more than enough to put me off teaching. I then looked, in the words of my my girlfriend at the time, she told me that I should get a real job and hurry up about it. So I landed at Robert Hale, who were a publisher of westerns and Regency romance in Clerkenwell. And that was my first job in publishing.
But then, since then, you've moved around a bit. You've been. Perhaps you'd like to say a little bit about where you went after that.
Sure. I then moved from Robert Hale to Sage. Worked on the media and communications list. And after 2 years at Sage, 2 productive and very drunken years at Sage, I moved to Continuum to become the commissioning editor for linguistics. Which is where I made the acquaintance of a certain Oliver Gadsby, who was heading up Continuum and was tasked with turning it around and ensuring its profitability.
And while you then moved on to Bloomsbury from there, is that right?
Well, Bloomsbury moved to me and to us in some ways. Oliver helped us to sell the company, and we became part of Bloomsbury. So in 2013, we formally became Bloomsbury Academic and made up the bedrock of the new Bloomsbury Academic offering. And so we moved from a slightly decrepit building on the South Bank to Bloomsbury's Bedford Square offices, which are salubrious and leafy and Georgian. We had a very, very good time there. It was definitely a culture shock for us.
Yeah, yes, and it's actually it feels to me as if Bloomsbury had been a remarkable story, because I can remember Bloomsbury being a brand new publisher not that long ago, perhaps in the 80s and 90s. And now they must be, one, I suppose, through Harry Potter, they've become one of the biggest publishers, really, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think the key to their success is having not squandered the Harry Potter money, to have invested it extremely wisely in lots and lots of long-term bets, some academic performers, some professional publications, the tax stuff, the legal stuff, the nautical publishing. It's all been a wonderful counterpoint to the fairly risky and high stakes game of trade publishing. Yeah, it's a really remarkable success story, actually.
And from there, you moved on to Rowan and Littlefield?
Yes, I left Bloomsbury in, I believe, late 2017, took a bit of time out, and then was interviewed by a certain Oliver Gadsby, who occurs regularly in my life. And the position of publisher, that was for the position of publisher for anthropology, cultural studies, and geography. So a real leap from linguistics, but certainly something that was fascinating to get stuck into. And that's been a really productive and interesting 2 years.
So throughout your time as an academic publisher, what do you have to cover every form of sort of academic discipline, or have you focused particularly in some areas?
It's mostly been linguistics, just through sheer longevity on that list. I've focused predominantly on the humanities and social sciences, and within that it's a pretty broad church. And so I think one of the absolute rewards of that particular career has been being exposed to new and exciting ideas pretty much every day. Often they'd be ideas that I could barely understand, but it was fascinating nonetheless. And yeah, a real privilege to work with some fascinating academics, some brilliant thinkers, and some truly shocking and awful IT systems, as I'm sure you're well aware. It's really been a journey.
And I noticed, looking a little bit at your background, I noticed you said quite early on you were interested in semiotics, and so I suppose structuralism and so on. So is that what led you into the area of linguistics, or?
Being honest, it was the chance of being a commissioning editor. It's a bit like, I guess, getting your pilot's wings. It was what I wanted at the time, and linguistics seemed to fit quite well. Obviously, the person interviewing me thought so, but as soon as I got my feet under the table, I was hooked. It was a real fascinating mix of heady semiotics and meaning and struggles with language, but also some really dense syntactic trees and grammars, and some books that would genuinely send you to sleep immediately if you ever needed to that sort of thing. Yeah, it was brilliant. And the mix of personalities in linguistics has always entertained me too. Some absolute legendary scholars who would be the most nerdy people that you've ever met, and some fascinating semioticians who were just rock stars, who were out there with their entourage.
And was it all that moved you on? I mean, I noticed that you're both on the board of another smaller firm called Broken Sleep Publishers, and also I think was it in 2011 you published your first novel, and you're now working on another novel, and also you've written some poetry. So what was it, your degree at Oxford, or was it this that brought you into that?
I think it was that particular urge that led me to do the degree in the first place. My A levels were broadly split between I did maths, physics, and English, so I had a fairly difficult decision on what to do. For a while, I had physics filled out on my UCAS form. I was off to be a physicist, but it was the lure of the written page that drew me back, and so I put down for English literature. And I've always been a creative writer in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I came back to that and wanted to do that.
It's a fascinating area, because I spent 8 years in Norwich, where I was the dean of Norwich. And of course, we had the creative writing school at the University of East Anglia nearby. So I met people like, Malcolm, who do I mean? Author and so on, who was the head of who started off the creative writing thing in UEA. So tell me then, having written poetry and enjoyed poetry, who would you put down as some of your your sort of heroes in poetics?
It's a tricky question. I would have to go. Otherwise, I think my wife would be particularly upset with me. I'd have to go with Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman actually was a poet that we had read out at our wedding, and certainly the poetry of Walt Whitman has been with me for a long while. I think the ideas it contained within that, the transcendental movement, the American transcendentalists, and they took from the Romantics before them, about the idea of losing yourself in nature, in the world, in the spirit, I think are pretty compelling. I think, yeah, so if forced to name names, I would say Whitman, probably Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams. I mean, it's a pretty blokey list. It's a pretty American list. I'm sure there are other poets that I'd choose in a different mood, but that's who I'd go.
No, that's really interesting, and I think Whitman is an interesting man. I first was introduced to him through Vaughan Williams' Sea Symphony, which is based on the actual words are based on his verse. But and how about now? What brought you into stationers?
It's gonna sound like a broken record at this point, but again, it was Oliver Gadsby, who was already involved in the stationers when I was at Continuum, and encouraged me to attend a few events. I went along, very much enjoyed the convivial chat, the very good wine, the lovely tiny sausages, and generally the history, the advocacy, the history, the authority of the place spoke to me. We discussed earlier on about some of the things that I hope to do in publishing, and we've emailed, and I think the changes that need to happen in publishing can definitely be urged along with the authority of the stationers and with the advocacy that several centuries gives you.
And that's the direction it sounds as if you're moving at the moment in terms of change management. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to be enrolled in a change management course. I've been looking at the ways that we can apply that to publishing, and the ways that we can better manage change within publishing in a systematic way, in a more rigorous way. Because sometimes publishers just tend to go at things and let the chips fall where they may. And I think we could do a lot better. And the companies and the organizations that have done better just do better and are more profitable. And
this all sounds very, very encouraging from the stationer's point of view, because I'm sure that in the coming years as a stationer, you may have quite a lot to offer us.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Well, we need.
I hope so.
Yes, I'm
pressure.
Yeah, and yeah, change, because we're about to sort of embark on change with Redevelop Hall, and we hope also that means that it will mean that new ideas keep coming to us as one of those companies that's really rooted in our industry. So perhaps my passing last question might be then, what would you like to see yourself offering stationers in the coming years?
I think a voice that's aware of some of the perhaps more pressing some of the more pressing changes that need to happen within the publishing industry and within the creative industries. I think I've got a fairly broad range of experiences that can speak to that, and that's what I'd like to do, is to try and get involved in pushing the conversations in the way, in the right direction. And I think we're well set. I think we've got some fantastic and energetic committees and some really interesting leaders within the stations, and I don't see any opposition to some of the more necessary changes within publishing. So yeah, I'd hope to contribute in some small way to that, I think.
That sounds really encouraging, and perhaps the thing I'm looking forward to is reading your next novel. And
you might have to wait a little while. It's been
well, don't worry about that, because we may find space by then to actually have some sort of party for it in Stationers' Hall. Thank you so much, Gurdeep.
an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.